It began with a name that was never meant to be spoken. A name carved into a stone so old the letters have almost vanished, yet the ground beneath still breathes its secret. The people who once lived here called it a curse. The church called it shame. But the bloodline, they called it destiny. No one outside the valley remembers them now. The family that built their fortune from sin, buried their children in silence, and burned their house before they'd ever let an outsider see what was inside. And maybe that's exactly why the story survived. In whispers, in fragments, in the eyes of those who never truly escaped. If you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of their confession, written in shaky ink, trembling hands, in the margins of a Bible found decades later in the ruins. "We are not what we seem," it says. "We are what was made of us." That's where our story begins, in a forgotten corner of the American South, where bloodlines didn't just mix, they devoured themselves. Where the preacher's sermons were drowned by cries in the night, and the children grew up believing that guilt was inherited like property. The locals call it the House of Seven Doors. No one knows how many people actually live there. No census ever recorded their names after 1921. But in one of the county's oldest ledgers, next to the faded record of births, there's a note, written in red Z, line broken, seal kept. For nearly a century, no one questioned what that meant. Until now, because someone found something buried beneath the floorboards. Something that was never meant to see daylight again. And when they opened it, they didn't just find evidence of a crime, they found the reason the family never left. You see, some secrets aren't buried because they're forgotten. They're buried because they're still alive. And this one, this story, was waiting for someone like you to come looking. They said the first sin began with love, but not the kind written about in poetry or hymns. This was the kind that hid behind locked doors, whispered in darkness, and left a trail of guilt that never stopped bleeding. The town knew something was wrong with the Hollands. They were polite, God-fearing people in public, always at Sunday service, always first to donate when the church roof needed mending. But behind the thick drapes of that old house, something else festered. It began with Samuel Holland, the patriarch, a Civil War veteran turned land baron, whose fortune rose while the rest of the county starved. He built his empire from the sweat of orphans and prisoners, and he built his home like a fortress. Locals said he was a man who didn't trust outsiders or even his own kin. Yet there was one person he trusted completely, his daughter, Mary. She was said to be his reflection, his angel, though some claimed his affection went beyond what a father should ever feel. By the time Mary turned 16, Samuel had driven away every suitor who came to court her. One vanished after being caught near the house at night. Another left town with a broken jaw and a warning never to return. The story went quiet after that, until Mary gave birth to a child that no one dared to speak of. The county records list no father, and the church refused to baptize the baby. Samuel's wife, a frail woman named Eleanor, stopped appearing in public soon after. When she finally died, the obituary didn't list a cause. Just a single line, "May her soul rest, though her house will not." People whispered that the baby had Samuel's eyes, that it never cried, that the doctor who delivered it left town that same week and never came back. But none of it was proven. The Hollands controlled everything, the land, the law, the silence. And yet, for all their power, their blood carried something darker than wealth or pride. It carried memory, a memory that would pass from father to child, generation after generation, until it became impossible to tell where love ended and sin began. That's the secret of the Hollands. And it's only the beginning. Decades passed, and the house aged the way guilt does, slowly, unevenly, with cracks that no one wanted to see. The town around it changed, dirt roads became paved, the mill closed, the world moved on. But the Holland property remained untouched, sealed off by rusted gates and creeping vines that seemed to grow thicker every year. By the 1950s, no one dared to go near it after sundown. Children told stories of lights flickering in the upper windows, though there was no electricity running to the place. A mailman once swore he saw a figure standing on the balcony, a young woman in white, motionless, staring at him until he dropped his bag and fled. When the sheriff went to investigate, he found nothing but footprints in the dust. Bare footprints, small ones. The last known Holland heir was a man named Thomas, a quiet recluse who rarely left the house and lived off what little money remained. He kept no company, spoke to no one. The only sound neighbors claimed to hear from the property was an old phonograph playing hymns on repeat, songs about redemption and fire. In 1958, the county tried to seize the property for unpaid taxes. When deputies entered the home, they found every window boarded from the inside and the mirrors covered with cloth. Upstairs, the walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them, all showing the same faces repeated through generations. Fathers who looked like sons, mothers who looked like daughters. The resemblance wasn't just uncanny, it was identical. At the center of the parlor was a single table. On it, a Bible open to the book of Leviticus, the passage marked in black ash. The iniquity of the fathers shall be visited upon the children. Thomas Holland was never found. Only a trail of footprints leading down into the cellar, and then stopping at the dirt wall, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. The deputies sealed the place and filed their report. The story was forgotten again, or maybe just ignored. But history has a strange way of punishing silence, because 60 years later, the ground gave something back, and it wasn't bones they found. It was something that breathed. It was the summer of 2019 when the secret came clawing out of the earth. A construction crew had been hired to clear the Holland property, the county finally selling the land after decades of legal limbo. No one knew the history anymore. The family name had faded into rumor, and the workers were just there to do a job. But as the bulldozers tore through the tangled brush, one of the machines struck something solid beneath the soil. At first, they thought it was a foundation stone. Then they realized it was wood, old, hand-cut, sealed tight, a door. The crew pried it open, expecting a root cellar. What they found instead stopped them, cold. It was a chamber, perfectly preserved, dry, lined with jars. Hundreds of them. Inside each jar, floating in amber liquid, were small shapes. At first glance they looked like dolls, but the longer you stared, the more wrong they seemed. Their features were too human, too real. The sheriff's department was called. Then the state. Forensics teams swept in, documenting everything. The case made local headlines for a week. Human remains found on historic property. But what they didn't tell the public was what else they found. A journal, bound in cracked leather, with a child's handwriting. The first page read, "For those who come after us, forgive what was done in your name." The following pages were filled with drawings, crude sketches of people, marked with arrows and numbers, notes about pure blood, about returning to the root, about keeping the light within the family. Investigators assumed it was the writings of a disturbed child, until they tested the ink. It was less than 30 years old. That meant someone had been in that cellar long after the house was abandoned. Someone who still believed in the family's mission. The same twisted ritual of purity and possession that began more than a century before. When the evidence reached the state archives, a few files went missing. Reports were redacted. The jars disappeared into a government facility no one would name. And just like that, the story was buried again. This time by official hands. But not everyone forgot. One of the men on that crew couldn't sleep after what he saw. He said he kept dreaming of faces pressed against glass, watching him, and one night, when he returned to the site on his own, he found footprints. Small, bare, leading straight from the pit to the edge of the woods. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. They searched for him for 6 days. Dogs, drones, volunteers, the works. But the woods around the old Holland property are thick, swampy, and older than the town itself. The kind of place where sound dies before it reaches you. By the end of the week, all they found was his flashlight, still on, lying in the mud near a hollow tree. Inside that hollow, there was something else. A photograph, black and white, water-damaged, but unmistakable. It showed a man, the missing worker, standing beside another figure. The second man looked just like him. Not similar, identical, same height, same face, same eyes. But the photograph was dated 1923. The sheriff's office sealed it away. His family was told he'd drowned, though no body was ever recovered. The case was closed quietly, like so many before it. Yet in town, people began to whisper again, saying the Holland curse had woken up, that it wasn't done with them. Old-timers claimed to see lights moving through the property at night. Not flashlights. Lanterns, the kind that burned whale oil, flickering with an unnatural steadiness. Hunters found animal carcasses arranged in patterns on the ground, bones stacked into symbols that no one could explain. And then there were the voices. low rhythmic, almost like prayer. One hiker recorded them on his phone, a deep male chant repeating the same phrase over and over. The blood remembers. He posted it online. The clip went viral. Then his account disappeared. A week later, so did he. Locals tried to avoid the area, but the story spread beyond the county, drawing in journalists, thrill seekers, and self-proclaimed historians looking for proof. Most left disappointed, saying there was nothing there but ruins. But a few came back shaken, claiming they'd seen people moving in the woods, pale figures that kept their distance, watching. It was one of those journalists who found the last piece of the puzzle. Deep in the archives of the state library, buried behind mislabeled census records, was a photograph of the original Holland family, Samuel, Mary, and the infant. Only the baby wasn't alone. There were two, one facing the camera and another, faint, almost transparent, behind it, like a reflection that didn't belong. And beneath the photograph, in handwriting that matched the journal found in the cellar, was a single line: born into sin, born twice, never to die. The journalist's name was Daniel Crow. He wasn't a believer in curses or folklore, at least not before he stepped foot on Holland land. He'd built his reputation exposing historical hoaxes and fabricated hauntings, the kind of stories that preyed on the desperate and the superstitious. But something about the Hollands drew him in deeper than he'd planned. He stayed in the old parsonage near the ruins, using it as a base while he filmed. His notes from that week still exist. Pages of sharp observations that gradually unravel into obsession. The first entries are clinical: soil samples, genealogy, local rumors. Then, halfway through the notebook, his handwriting starts to slant, sentences running into each other, thoughts looping. He wrote about hearing footsteps in the hall at night, about seeing candlelight through the trees even when he was sure no one else was out there. He mentioned voices, whispering his name, but never from the same direction twice. One entry reads, "They want to be remembered. That's all. But the remembering is what feeds them." Through on the seventh night, his notes stop. What happens next is pieced together from police reports and his camera footage. The footage begins with Daniel walking through the woods, the light from his lantern trembling across the leaves. He's speaking to himself, voice low, calm, explaining that he's found a new passage beneath the ruins, a tunnel sealed with bricks. He says he's going to open it. When he breaks through the wall, the air fills with dust. He shines the light inside and says, almost whispering, "There's more of them." The camera pans slowly, showing shapes in the darkness, figures, dozens of them, sitting motionless along the walls. For a moment, it looks like statues. Then one of them moves. The footage shakes violently, a scream cuts through static, and then silence. The next morning, the sheriff's department found his lantern still burning at the tunnel's mouth. The camera was retrieved, but half the recording was missing. The portion that survived was uploaded anonymously 2 days later, under the title "Born Twice." It stayed online for less than 24 hours before being taken down, but by then, hundreds of people had already seen it. And in every re-upload, in every enhanced version, one thing never changed: the final frame, a single image, grainy and indistinct, showing Daniel standing at the tunnel's edge, and behind him, something with his face, smiling. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? After the video vanished, so did the evidence. The sheriff's office denied ever having the footage. The county sealed off the Holland property, citing unstable terrain. Reporters who asked too many questions found their emails bouncing back, their credentials revoked, and Daniel Crow's name faded like it had never existed. No family records, no forwarding address, no official missing person report. But stories like this don't end with silence. They ferment. They change shape, and sometimes they find a new voice. A month after the incident, locals began finding envelopes in their mailboxes, no return address, just a wax seal in the shape of a 7-pointed star. Inside, a single photograph, always the same. A picture of their own home, taken at night, from just beyond the tree line. On the back, handwritten words: "You were chosen." The town fell into panic. Churches filled overnight. Families moved away without saying goodbye. Those who stayed said they could hear the chanting again, faint and distant, carried by the wind across the valley. Some said they saw Daniel, or something that looked like him, walking the edge of the woods at dusk, always watching, never answering. Then came the fire. It started in the center of the old Holland property. No lightning, no fuel, no sign of intrusion. Yet the flames burned clean, straight lines across the ground, forming symbols only visible from above. Firefighters said it was like the earth had written something in light. When the smoke cleared, the soil was black glass, melted, hardened, and unbroken, and carved into it, deep enough to last another 100 years, were words no one dared to speak aloud. The seal is open. In the months that followed, strange births were recorded across the county. Children born with identical marks, small, perfect circles behind their left ears, like tiny burns. Doctors called it coincidence. The parents whispered otherwise. Now, when you drive through that part of the state, you'll see the land fenced off, marked, restricted. But some nights, if you pull over and listen, you can still hear the echo. A soft hum beneath the wind, steady as a heartbeat. Locals say it's the blood calling to itself. The Hollands may be gone, but what they made never died. It just waits, in the dark, in the dirt, in the next generation born too much like the last. And if you've listened this far, maybe that hum you're hearing right now isn't from your speakers. Maybe it's closer. Because once you know their name, they remember yours.